Dear learners, welcome back to WSE True Stories, where English learning becomes an unforgettable adventure. Today, we invite you to discover the story of a man who didn't just build buildings, he reimagined the way we live, work, and move through cities. He was a rebel with a ruler, a visionary armed with concrete and a pencil. His ideas were bold, even controversial. His legacy is visible in skylines around the world. His name? Le Corbusier. But this is not just a story about architecture. It's a story of obsession and purpose. Of one man who believed that design could transform society. That beauty wasn't a luxury, it was a right. That cities could be more than crowded chaos, they could be machines for living. As you follow his journey from a small Swiss town to the great capitals of the world, you'll uncover a life of constant reinvention, of fierce battles between tradition and innovation, of breathtaking triumphs and painful defeats. You'll also sharpen your English listening skills, and more than that, you'll be inspired to think differently about your own environment, your dreams, and your impact. So get ready for a powerful, eye-opening story about creativity, courage, and the cost of greatness. Let's begin the journey of Le Corbusier, the man who dared to draw a new world. Charles-Édouard Jeanneret was born on October 6, 1887, in the small town of La Chaux-de-Fonds, nestled in the Jura Mountains of Switzerland. The town was quiet, almost isolated, but it held a special rhythm, the ticking of time. La Chaux-de-Fonds was famous for its watchmaking industry. Almost every family had some connection to it, and the precise, delicate work of crafting timepieces shaped the culture of the town. His father, Georges Édouard, was an engraver of watch faces. His mother, Marie Charlotte, was a piano teacher, deeply artistic and gentle. Together, they nurtured Charles-Édouard with both discipline and imagination. From his father, he learned attention to detail, from his mother, the value of beauty and harmony. It was a household where silence was filled with thought, and every movement seemed to carry purpose. But the world outside their quiet home was changing fast. Industrialization was in full swing across Europe. Cities were expanding, often in chaotic and unhealthy ways. Factories brought jobs, but also smoke, crowding, and poverty. The elegant order of traditional towns like La Chaux-de-Fonds was being swallowed by a new, uncertain world. The divide between the ideal and the real, between beauty and practicality, was growing wider every day. Young Charles-Édouard felt the tension early on. He was a curious boy, often more interested in sketching buildings than playing with other children. His teachers noticed his restlessness and his sharp mind. At the local art school, he began training in decorative arts, preparing to enter the watchmaking industry like so many others. But something in him resisted the expected path. He wasn't content with decorating tiny surfaces, he wanted to shape space itself. His hometown offered him one crucial gift, a mentor. Charles Leplatinier, a teacher at the art school, saw something in the boy others had missed. Leplatinier told him, "You are not made to decorate watches. You are an architect." That single sentence changed the direction of his life. And yet, architecture wasn't just a job in those days, it was a profession steeped in tradition, ruled by classical styles and historical imitation. For a boy from the provinces with no formal background in engineering or architecture, the path ahead would be steep. But Charles-Édouard was ready to climb. The world outside La Chaux-de-Fonds called to him, its problems, its opportunities, its promise of reinvention. He would soon leave his hometown behind, chasing an idea that would become his life's mission, to redesign the modern world. But the road to transformation would not be smooth. His first steps into the world of architecture would challenge everything he thought he knew. When Charles-Édouard Jeanneret left La Chaux-de-Fonds, he wasn't yet Le Corbusier. He was just a determined young man carrying sketchbooks, ideas, and a fire in his chest that wouldn't burn out. His early travels took him to some of Europe's greatest cities, Paris, Vienna, Berlin, places alive with artistic energy but also crippled by urban chaos. As he walked through crowded neighborhoods in Paris and studied the grimy, overbuilt apartment blocks in Berlin, something stirred in him. These cities were choking on their own growth. Beautiful old buildings sat next to filthy tenements. Streets were narrow, air was polluted, and the working class lived packed together in conditions barely fit for animals. This wasn't just bad planning, it was inhuman. Jeanneret began to feel a deep sense of injustice. Why, he wondered, did only the rich have access to sunlight, fresh air, and green space? Why was beauty reserved for the privileged? Why couldn't cities be rational, clean, and healthy, designed to serve everyone, not just the elite? At the same time, he faced another frustration: the world of architecture wasn't ready to listen. The field was still tied to tradition, decorative facades, grand arches, columns, and ornamentation that served style over function. Young Charles-Édouard thought it was all a lie. He saw the modern age, its machines, its steel, its concrete, as an opportunity to build differently. To build better. But saying this aloud made him seem like a threat, even a heretic. He returned to Switzerland for a brief time, where he was invited to teach at the very art school he once attended. But instead of settling into a quiet life, he took another risk. He set out to build his first major architectural project, the Villa Savoye, a country house for a local client. It was modest, and still influenced by local traditional styles, but it was the beginning of something. It showed he could design. It gave him confidence. Still, he knew he couldn't stay in his small hometown forever. Europe was transforming, and if he wanted to be part of the new world, he had to think globally. In 1910, he traveled to Germany to work with the famous industrial designer Peter Behrens, where he encountered other young minds like Walter Gropius and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, future legends of modernism. But at the time, they were just young men, hungry for change. It was during these travels and apprenticeships that Charles-Édouard began to form his unique vision, an architecture without unnecessary decoration. A style based on function, proportion, and clarity. He started using bold, theoretical language, calling houses machines for living in. To him, buildings should be like cars or airplanes, efficient, beautiful, and revolutionary. But who would take such radical ideas seriously? His writings were passionate, even arrogant. He dismissed much of the architectural past as outdated and wasteful. And in doing so, he made enemies. Critics called him cold, mechanical, even dangerous. Was he just an idealist with a pen? Or was he the prophet of a new world? He knew he had to do more than write theories. He had to build something that no one could ignore. And so, Charles-Édouard would transform himself into Le Corbusier. But transformation always comes with risk. His next step would test everything. The transformation wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. In 1920, Charles-Édouard Jeanneret adopted a new name, Le Corbusier. The name came from his maternal grandfather's surname, Le Corbusier, but it also served a deeper purpose. By stepping into this new identity, he freed himself from the past. From the quiet Swiss boy sketching rooftops, to the modern prophet of architecture. Le Corbusier wasn't just a man, it was a mission. And he wasted no time. That same year, he launched a bold new magazine with his colleague Amédée Ozenfant, called L'Esprit Nouveau, the New Spirit. In its pages, he laid out his radical vision. He attacked traditional styles, praising the efficiency of industrial design and championing a new aesthetic for a modern age. He wrote with fire, "A house is a machine for living in." To many, it sounded cold, even offensive. But to Le Corbusier, it was a cry for sanity in a world of architectural madness. He introduced what would later be called his 5 points of architecture. 1. Pilotis, slender columns lifting the structure off the ground. 2. Flat roofs with gardens. 3. Open floor plans free from structural constraints. 4. Horizontal windows to bring in natural light. 5. Free facades unburdened by load-bearing walls. These weren't just theories, they were weapons. With them, he planned to cut through the chaos of Europe's post-war cities. But change comes slowly, and few were willing to give him a chance. Le Corbusier turned to writing, painting, and teaching, not just to survive, but to keep spreading his ideas. His sharp tone alienated many traditionalists, but it also drew a following of young idealists. In 1923, he published Vers en Architecture, Towards a New Architecture, a book that would become one of the most influential architectural texts of the 20th century. In it, he compared buildings to cars and ships, celebrating functionality, proportion, and modern materials. He praised grain silos and airplanes as symbols of a new beauty, one born not from decoration, but from purpose. One line from that book would echo through history: "Architecture is the learned game, correct and magnificent, of forms assembled in the light." And yet, as his fame grew, real projects remained few. Le Corbusier was respected, but not trusted. Many admired his theories, but few dared to let him build. Then, in the mid-1920s, opportunity knocked. A wealthy art collector, Raoul Laroche, commissioned him to design a house in Paris. Le Corbusier delivered the Maison Laroche, a clean, white structure that looked nothing like the ornate Parisian buildings nearby. It was functional, geometric, elegant, and completely modern. The building shocked visitors. It was unlike anything the city had seen before. This was followed by his first masterpiece, Villa Savoye, built in 1929 on the outskirts of Paris. It was a physical manifesto of his 5 points. Raised on pilotis, surrounded by ribbon windows, crowned with a rooftop garden, Villa Savoye became a symbol of architectural modernism. But even as he began to build his dream, Le Corbusier struggled with rejection, misunderstanding, and harsh criticism. Many called his buildings soulless. Some claimed he was trying to erase culture with his machine-like logic. And others questioned whether his designs could ever be scaled to the needs of real cities. Still, he pressed on. He believed that design was not just about buildings, it was about improving life. And for that, he was willing to fight. Let's pause for a moment. Do you think Le Corbusier was too radical? Were his ideas revolutionary, or just unrealistic? Let us know what you think in the comments. Because his next vision wouldn't be a house, or even a neighborhood. It would be an entire city, designed from scratch. But not everyone was ready for what he had in mind. In 1925, at the International Exhibition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts in Paris, Le Corbusier unveiled something extraordinary and deeply unsettling to many. It wasn't a building. It wasn't a painting. It was a plan. The plan Voisin. Displayed boldly across a massive model, it showed a completely redesigned vision of central Paris. Le Corbusier proposed tearing down much of the right bank north of the Seine and replacing it with towering cruciform skyscrapers arranged in a perfect grid. Between them, wide open green spaces, motorways, and parks. Everything was ordered. Everything was clean. And everything traditional, gone. The plan caused an uproar. For many Parisians, it was architectural blasphemy. How could someone dare suggest demolishing the historic heart of their beloved city? But Le Corbusier wasn't apologizing. He wasn't interested in preserving decay. He believed that the cities of the past were obsolete, built for horses, not cars, built for royalty, not workers. His plan Voisin was not just bold, it was a declaration of war against urban misery. Narrow streets, crowded slums, dark apartments, he wanted to erase them all. He envisioned a world where modern life could finally breathe. To him, the old city was a dying body. His plan was surgery. But few were willing to hand him the scalpel. Despite the outrage, the exhibition gave Le Corbusier something he desperately needed: international attention. The plan Voisin made headlines across Europe and beyond. Some governments were horrified, others intrigued. And slowly, invitations began to arrive from faraway places. Not Paris, but Moscow. Not London, but Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires, and Algiers. He began to travel, sketching, presenting, debating. Everywhere he went, he carried the same message: the city must be rebuilt, not reformed. He argued for vertical density surrounded by green space, for public housing lifted into the air, for rational transportation systems. In many ways, his ideas predicted the megacities of today. But still, his greatest plans remained unbuilt. He was a prophet without a city. That changed in the 1940s. After World War II, much of Europe lay in ruins. Cities needed to be rebuilt, not just repaired, but reimagined. And Le Corbusier's phone began to ring. His turning point came in India, of all places. In 1950, the newly independent Indian government, under Prime Minister Nehru, invited Le Corbusier to help design a new capital for the state of Punjab. The old capital, Lahore, had become part of Pakistan after partition. A new city was needed. A symbol of progress. Of independence. Of the future. The name of the city? Chandigarh. It was a dream come true. At last, a blank slate. A chance to build an entire city from the ground up. Le Corbusier poured his soul into it. He designed the city's layout, its government buildings, its housing, its public spaces. He used concrete as his primary material, strong, modern, honest. And Chandigarh rose from the earth like a sculpture. For the first time, one of Le Corbusier's grand visions was not just a drawing, but a living, breathing reality. But it came at a price. Some said the city felt cold, alien, disconnected from Indian culture. Others admired its daring, its ambition, its modernity. Today, Chandigarh remains one of the only cities in the world fully designed by Le Corbusier, and one of the most controversial. Was Chandigarh a triumph? Or a warning? That debate continues to this day. What's certain is this: in building it, Le Corbusier stepped into history not just as a theorist, but as a creator of worlds. And yet, even as concrete dried under the Indian sun, a deeper struggle was brewing within him. A struggle between control and chaos. Between utopia and the human heart. The next chapter of his life would push him into conflict not only with the world, but with himself. Even as Chandigarh was being constructed, Le Corbusier's vision of modernism was under siege, from the very world he was trying to save. Across Europe and North America, a backlash was brewing. The public housing towers inspired by his ideas, rows of concrete blocks meant to bring order and dignity, were now being criticized as cold, lifeless, even dangerous. In cities like London, New York, and Paris, architects had borrowed his style but often ignored his deeper philosophy. They built tall, yes, but without the green space, the human scale, the design precision that had always been central to his work. The result? Soulless towers, often poorly maintained, filled with social problems. Concrete became a symbol not of progress, but of alienation. And the name Le Corbusier, once whispered with reverence, was now spoken with skepticism. It was the great irony of his life: his ideas had won, but his soul had lost. To make matters worse, he watched as younger generations of architects began to rebel. They mocked modernism as sterile. They turned back to traditional forms, to organic shapes, to postmodern styles that embraced irony, color, even kitsch. To them, Le Corbusier was no longer a prophet, he was the old guard. And yet, despite the criticism, he refused to retreat. In fact, he became more personal, more introspective. He began designing the chapel of Notre Dame du Haut in Ronchamp, France, a building that shocked everyone. Gone were the sharp lines, the rigid geometry. Instead, the chapel was curved, poetic, almost mystical. Its thick white walls swelled like waves, its roof floated like a cloud. Light streamed in through asymmetrical openings like the fingers of God. This was not the Le Corbusier the world thought they knew. But it was the Le Corbusier he had always been. He once wrote, "Architecture is the masterly, correct, and magnificent play of masses brought together in light." And in Ronchamp, he played with mass and light not to control people, but to move them. Still, the contradictions in his life deepened. He was a man who longed for order, yet who stirred chaos wherever he went. A man who believed in universal beauty, yet clashed with every culture he touched. A man who loved clarity, but whose words and buildings often confused and divided. His personal life was just as complicated. He never had children. He spent much of his life away from his wife, Yvonne, who remained in Paris as he traveled the world. Their relationship was marked by long absences and emotional distance, perhaps a reflection of the very tensions he explored in his work. And yet, despite everything, he pressed on. He kept drawing, writing, dreaming. He knew he would never be fully understood. But he also knew that he had touched something eternal. At the age of 77, in 1965, Le Corbusier took one final walk along the rocky coastline of Roquebrune-Cap-Martin, where he kept a modest holiday cabin, a small wooden box called Le Cabanon. It was the opposite of his grand city plans, tiny, humble, quiet. Just 9 square meters. That morning, he went for a swim in the Mediterranean Sea. He never came back. His body was found drifting near the shore. Some say it was a heart attack. Others suggest he ignored doctors' warnings and went into the water despite his health. But one thing was certain. Le Corbusier had died in the very element he admired most, nature. Some mourned. Others criticized him, even in death. But his ideas refused to fade. So here's a question for you. Do you think Le Corbusier went too far in trying to control how people should live? Or was he simply ahead of his time, and misunderstood? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Because the story isn't over. The man may be gone, but his blueprints were just beginning to reshape the world. In the years following his death, the world began to see Le Corbusier differently. For decades, he had been the loudest voice in the room, provoking, insisting, daring. But now, in silence, his ideas began to mature in the public imagination. Critics and admirers alike took a second look. And what they saw was astonishing. From the shadow of controversy emerged the outline of a legacy that had reached across continents. Le Corbusier wasn't just a theorist, he had become one of the most influential architects in history. His fingerprints were everywhere. Skylines filled with glass and steel echoed his early belief in functional beauty. Urban planners worldwide referenced his principles, whether they supported or challenged them. His Unite D habitation in Marseille, completed in 1952, became a global prototype for collective housing. It wasn't just an apartment building, it was a vertical village, with shops, corridors like internal streets, and rooftop gardens. People lived, played, and shopped within the same structure. For many, this was the future. Though his plan voisin for Paris was never realized, elements of it lived on in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, designed by Lúcio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer under similar principles. Grids, zones, monumental axes, Le Corbusier's influence was unmistakable. And of course, there was Chandigarh. Despite its critics, the city functioned and grew. Government workers, families, and students filled its sectors. Its clean lines, open boulevards, and monumental civic buildings gave it an identity like no other city in India. Over time, Chandigarh became not just a living experiment, but a cultural landmark. UNESCO would later recognize 17 of Le Corbusier's architectural works as World Heritage Sites, including Villa Savoye, the Capitol complex in Chandigarh, and the Chapel of Ronchamp. These sites stood as testaments to a mind that had imagined a different kind of future. More than buildings, it was his philosophy that endured. Form follows function was no longer just a phrase, it was a movement. He had helped introduce the world to a new way of thinking about architecture, not as decoration, but as a tool for social change. Modern architecture, what we now take for granted in airports, libraries, museums, and housing, grew from the seeds he planted. Even those who rejected him were shaped by him. Some architects turned away from his rigid lines, seeking warmer, more human designs. But they still had to define themselves against Le Corbusier, proof of his dominance in the field. You couldn't enter architecture without confronting him. And artists, urbanists, and even philosophers found his writings rich with meaning. His essays were poetic, his sketches expressive. He was an architect, yes, but also a painter, a thinker, and a provocateur. Above all, Le Corbusier proved that architecture could be a force, not just to house bodies, but to shape minds and societies. He made people ask, what should a home be? What should a city provide? What does beauty mean in an age of machines? Those questions remain urgent even today. Because in our time, of megacities, of housing crises, of environmental threats, the challenges he saw nearly a century ago have only grown more complex. And the solutions? They may still lie, in part, in his notebooks. In his willingness to ask uncomfortable questions. In his drive to serve not just the elite, but the everyday worker. In his belief that architecture was not frozen music, but living hope. His victories weren't measured only in concrete and steel, but in courage. The courage to imagine something different. The courage to draw it. And the courage to build it, even if the world wasn't ready yet. Le Corbusier's legacy is a paradox, powerful, complicated, and deeply human. He was a man who believed in order, yet sparked endless debate. A man who dreamed of clean, efficient cities, yet found himself accused of designing cold, impersonal structures. And yet, it's precisely this tension, between control and compassion, between logic and emotion, that makes his story so meaningful today. What can we learn from him? First, the courage to challenge the status quo. Le Corbusier didn't just accept the world as it was. He looked at the smoky, overcrowded cities of early 20th century Europe and dared to ask, what if we started over? What if we built cities for people, not for profit? Second, the power of ideas. Though many of his projects were never built, his influence traveled further than steel and concrete ever could. His concepts became blueprints not just for buildings, but for thought. Even those who disagreed with him had to reckon with his vision. Third, the cost of vision. Le Corbusier was often alone. Misunderstood. Rejected. He sacrificed comfort, popularity, and even relationships to remain true to what he believed. That kind of dedication is rare. It reminds us that pursuing a meaningful life isn't always easy, but it can be deeply impactful. And perhaps most importantly, his work raises an uncomfortable yet vital question. Can we design a better world? It's not a question with a simple answer. But Le Corbusier pushed us to keep asking. To look beyond appearances. To build not just for today, but for generations. In our modern cities, filled with glass towers, rapid transit, green rooftops, and public parks, you can still see echoes of his dream. And in our continuing struggles with housing, density, and design justice, you can still feel the urgency of his mission. Le Corbusier wasn't perfect. Far from it. He made mistakes, held controversial views, and sometimes let ego speak louder than empathy. But in the end, his life was a reminder that design is never neutral. The way we shape space shapes us in return. So whether you're walking through a quiet neighborhood or gazing up at a towering skyline, remember this. Somewhere, a young man with a sketchbook once dreamed that your life, yes, yours, could be made brighter, clearer, freer, simply by the way your world was built. And that dream still lives on. Now it's your turn to reflect. If you were the one designing a city, what would it look like? What values would shape your blueprint? We'd love to hear your answers in the comments. Dear learners, you've just traveled through the life of a man who didn't just design buildings, he challenged the very way we think about space, society, and the future. Le Corbusier showed us that true vision is never easy. It demands rebellion. It requires resilience. And it often leaves the dreamer standing alone before the world finally understands. His life reminds us that even if your ideas seem too bold, too different, too ahead of their time, if they are rooted in purpose, in service to humanity, they can leave a mark that echoes through generations. So what will you design with your life? Whether it's a career, a community, or a conversation, you have the power to shape the world around you. Not with concrete or steel, but with kindness, clarity, and courage. If this story inspired you to see your city, your home, or even your dreams in a new light, then share Le Corbusier's journey with someone else. Carry forward his message. Leave your own legacy, not necessarily in architecture, but in intention. And if you enjoyed learning English through this powerful real-life story, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and comment below. What lesson stayed with you most today? What image, idea, or moment from his life will you remember? We'd love to hear your reflections. Until next time, keep learning, keep imagining, and never be afraid to draw a better world. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next WSE True Story.